Yes, let me turn my microphone on. 27-2023 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is J.D. Patrieva, Councillor and Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. I would like to begin by reading a safety notice for tonight's meeting. In the event of an emergency, please evacuate council chambers through the nearest exit door, through the chamber doors, and obey all instructions given. And if assistance is required, please see the Deputy Clerk, which would be Devan this evening. So in the event of emergency, we'll follow Devan's lead out. Once you've evacuated the building, please gather in the front parking lot outside of Town Hall. Also, and I did this, please ensure your cell phones are on silent or turned off. And lastly, the Town of Lincoln Committee of the Whole meetings are posted on our YouTube channel. Closed captioning is available on all our videos by selecting the closed captioning button on the bottom right of the video. Members of committee are in attendance in person and remotely. Councillor Russell will be arriving later this evening remotely, and we've got regrets from Mayor Easton this evening. We also have staff in attendance in person and remotely. Additionally, we have resident delegations attending in person and remotely. Are there any declarations of interest tonight? Okay, I see none. Do members have any amendments to the order of tonight's agenda? Okay. We have no statutory public meetings this evening. We are now considering the consent agenda inclusive of the Heritage Advisory Committee minutes of September 14th, 2023. Would any member of committee like to remove this item from the consent agenda to discuss? Councillor Renchema.
Oh, thank you, Chair Patrieva. Yes, I'd like to remove the single item that's on the consent agenda for a question that I have.
Okay.
Thanks.
Right, then I'm going to the end of the regular agenda.
You got it.
So that, okay.
We'll just move on to number 7.
We will go on to number 7. So we'll deal with that at the end, Councillor? Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Maybe it's the same question I had.
Could be.
Okay.
I don't know.
Awesome. So we are now at the regular planning and economic development portion of tonight's agenda. We have 2 registered delegations for the planning and ECDev development agenda. Please note that the delegations have up to 5 minutes to speak. Our first delegation for this evening is Carla Mackey, speaking to item 7.2.1, King Street Corridor in the Beamsville Heritage Conservation District Study, PD 42-23. Carla, please go ahead.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to express my views this evening. I'm in full support of having the town proceed with the second phase of the Heritage Conservation District Study and Plan for the Beamsville-King Street Corridor. The significance of preserving the streetscapes and vistas along the Beamsville-King Street Corridor cannot be overstated. These elements are fundamental to upholding the community's heritage, maintaining its character, and enhancing its overall aesthetic appeal. Preserving these elements helps maintain a tangible link to the past and fosters a sense of community identity and heritage. Along King Street, there is a variety of architectural styles, including Georgian, Neoclassical, Regency, Edwardian, Arts and Crafts, Gothic Revival, Queen Anne, Beaux-Arts, and Art Deco, just to name a few, and a variety of building materials, including stone from the Gibson Quarry and brick made by the Beamsville Brickworks. There are homes for business magnates and homes for workers, and many have unique features and styles. Streetscapes also contribute to a community's unique sense of place. They define the visual character of our town, which creates a distinct atmosphere and identity that residents and visitors can recognize and connect with. We are not Grimsby, and we're not St. Catharines. We are Beamsville, located in the heart of the Bench, which is a very special geographic area. It is worthy of having preserved and well-designed streetscapes and architectural coherence, all of which contribute to the beauty of a place, making it more attractive to residents, tourists, visitors, and potential businesses. And finally, most importantly, in this context, Preserving streetscapes can guide urban planning and future urban development. Understanding and valuing the elements I've just mentioned can influence urban planning decisions and ensure that new developments complement and respect the existing character of an area. In summary, preserving streetscapes and vistas isn't just about maintaining the physical appearance of an area. It's about safeguarding cultural heritage, fostering community identity, and creating a visually appealing, functional spaces that benefit residents and visitors alike. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. Are there any questions to this delegation from committee? Okay, I see none. Thank you very much. Excellent
thank you.
presentation. Okay, our next delegation this evening is Kevin Bork, speaking to item 7.2.1, King Street Corridor in Beamsville, Heritage Conservation District Study, PD 42-23. Kevin, please go ahead.
Got it. Thank you for having me this evening, Mayor Easter and Easton, councillors and committee members. I'm here today to raise awareness of the additional potential burden that the town, business owners, and residents within the proposed Historical Conservation District are likely to face due to climate change. Specifically, I want to lend my voice behind the growing movement to address the dual mandate that our municipality is facing towards both preserving our cultural heritage and adapting to current and future climate challenges. The impact of climate change on buildings, homes, and town assets within historical or cultural value is a growing concern that needs to be addressed within any development plan in the proposed HCD plan. I am a resident of Beamsville and a senior engineer with the federal government's Department of Natural Resources Canada, and working in the clean energy and energy efficiency technology sectors for over 20 years, I have seen conflicts between preservation and climate policies. The Ontario Heritage Act lacks any mention of energy or climate. Similarly, the town's own corporate climate adaptation plan makes no mention of preservation, the town's heritage, or our culture. I'm not criticizing, but rather emphasizing that the intersection of climate and historical preservation is rarely discussed. I propose, in fact, that they are inextricable. I hope you now understand why this is an important issue and one that the town is in a unique position to address. The town is already preserving its past and embracing a climate plan for the future. We are at a crossroads where we can make lasting decisions by incorporating climate adaptation into historical conservation plans. I know that you are already probably doing this, but I want you to join me in taking a holistic view of Lincoln's future by addressing head-on the opportunities ahead to ensure climate adaptation is included in any HCD plans. Here's some concrete examples. Many older buildings have outdated heating technologies, posing challenges for upgrades to greener options. Historical buildings are often very poorly insulated with old windows and doors, which lead to higher GHG emissions. Without climate considerations being included, potential restrictions or upgrades may result in costlier and more polluting systems and effectively locking in CO2 emissions and more polluting energy systems within the HCD area itself. Other examples are awnings and window film technologies to reduce solar energy being absorbed by the walls and roofs of the building, increasing their cooling requirements, especially in more frequent extreme heat events, as was described in the climate adaptation plan. Or consider that older homes were seldom designed with cooling in mind. There is a risk that adaptations required to live comfortably may be restricted by heritage protection bylaws, leaving the heritage infrastructure vulnerable. Or, as I've seen in many cases over my career, where a more energy efficient or carbon neutral solution could be used, but adapting them for heritage assets make them prohibitively expensive. This is precisely where infrastructure loans and grants can help, but much of the grants and loan section of the Ontario Heritage Act has been removed. This means that the plan needs to be creative in its policy development. Increased rainfall and stronger winds can damage century-old infrastructure. Electrification, energy storage, and solar options may conflict with heritage objectives, especially if they involve putting things on the outside of buildings. One positive recent example is the lighting upgrade at the Cenotaph, where LED lights were installed. This is a simple, almost trivial example, but one that shows that the town can both meet its heritage and its energy and climate constraints. The town's corporate climate adaptation plan already has a framework required to incorporate climate with heritage. In fact, Goal 1 of Section 4.3 of the CCAP specifically mentions that the town will, and I quote, "review plans, policies, and procedures for alignment with adaptation goals and update where appropriate." I would argue that it's clear that the proposed HCD plan should include a climate lens. In conclusion, I urge the Council to consider the impact of climate change on any historical conservation district and to incorporate climate considerations into the HCD plan, which I support. I believe that the inclusion of a section that makes climate-specific policy recommendations should be included in the statement of work or scope of the plan. By doing so, the town of Lincoln will be able to preserve its cultural heritage while also protecting the environment and ensuring a sustainable future for generations to come to enjoy our heritage. We have the opportunity here to be leaders in our region, in our province, and in our country by ensuring that climate considerations are included in the very core of our cultural and heritage protection efforts. Thank you for your attention.
Kevin, thank you very much. Any questions from committee? Councilor Renchma.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I'm wondering, you're seeing gaps and where needs are required related to climate-specific policy recommendations within climate or with heritage district plans. Can you give me an example? Do you know of anybody that's got it right, who's doing it right?
Well, my understanding is because of the varied nature of every region, every historical district, the solutions tend to be tailored to that area. Take, for example, I think it's called Queen Street in Niagara-on-the-Lake, has a historical look. If you look, there's a lot of the building facades are higher than they need to be so that they can hide sort of air conditioning things. So it still looks and it maintains its heritage look, but allows the buildings to move towards more climate friendly or energy efficient technologies. But each is different. And it's not just buildings. It's stormwaters. A lot of the piping is a century old, and we're having more flooding events, higher heat. So I think what I'm saying is that any specific measures that might be taken would be tailored to what we have here, just like the HCD plan is tailored to what we have here. And I think that that those two actually mesh and marry very well, the climate and historical preservation.
And that we commit to consistently reviewing as we move through.
Consistently review, yes, but I think there's an opportunity since the HCD plan isn't out yet. The study was done, not that. I think there's an opportunity to include climate right at the get-go, within the scope of work, within the statement of work to AECOM or whoever is doing it, rather than come out with a sort of standard sort of HCD plan and then council here taking it back and saying, well, how do we incorporate climate into this? We're right at the cusp here. We're having the experts at AECOM who have seen this before. Let's get them to at least include suggestions or policy directives that the town could adopt, so that we don't go ahead and put in place something and then we're stuck for the next 50 years with something that has heritage value but is, degrading because of a warming climate.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Brunei.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. Through you to Mr. Bork. Kevin, thanks for your presentation. Very interesting perspective. I'm assuming that you attended one or both of the PICs that have occurred over the last 18 months?
Yes.
So I'm thinking that if you did attend, you heard some comments from some of the residents that attended those meetings that are heritage property owners, that had concerns about certain restrictions. So certainly embrace what you're saying in terms of, we're at the cusp when we're writing these policies and procedures that we have an opportunity to get this right from a climate change perspective. I'm losing my train of thought. Is that my phone? I thought I'd shut it off. Excuse me.
Sorry.
So, can you, Chair, can you go through to someone else? I'm sorry, I did shut my phone off. I don't understand what's happened.
No worries. So I'll go to Councilor Michalak, and then I'll come back to you, Councilor. Okay. Councilor Michalak.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. Through you to the presenter. I actually never thought of climate change at all when considering this HCD study. So I'm gathering, based on your presentation, that you are in favor of an HCD, Heritage Conservation District. Would you be in favor of it if the climate portion or the climate piece was not part of it? Because my thinking is with heritage conservation districts, there's restrictions on the glass you use, on the windows, on the roofs, on the facades, on the building materials, so that would have definitely an effect, which I never thought of, but would you still be in favor of a HD Heritage Conservation District even if there wasn't a climate piece to it?
It's a great question. I never thought of it before. I think I would have difficulty being in agreement with it, especially since the HCD deals with the built environment to a large degree. It deals with what people who've lived here for many, many years have built up. That's the Heritage Cultural District. And so anytime we touch on the built environment, whether it be a cenotaph or lighting or the way trees are or something, or buildings, the moment we touch the built environment, I think climate considerations must be considered. If they're not, I think we're locking ourselves into a world of hurt. Because as you said, if there are certain glass patterns or window types or that are required to maintain a certain look, and that, let's just say you go to replace a door and it's $3,000, but if you want a special door because it has to look a certain way and it has to be custom made, it has to be built some magic place, now it's $10,000. You're making these heritage properties, this heritage district, inaccessible, or they're going to get run down because people can't keep up. Every time they want to do something, they're either locking in climate emissions for the next 50 years, or they're always, they're in buildings that are not comfortable and not safe.
Okay, so
if there is a climate lens to it,
then you would be.
then I'm in agreement.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, and I know Director Brut is going to touch on this when we go to the report, but through you, or to you, Councillor, that's one of the misnomers of this. So that's why in the plan there's going to be, one-on-one dialogue with each of the property owners to discuss this and things like that. Mr. Bork, yeah, is that if I want to do X and it's going to cost me Y, then why would I do it? So I think that's all going to come out in the staff report, but you've raised some very salient points, so thank you. Councillor Timmers, and then Councillor Brunet, you're going to jump back in, right? Okay.
Thank you, Chair Patriva, through to the delegation. Thank you very much for being here tonight. I think it's very timely, and I think it is definitely something that should be included as a lens. And I know a lot of our initiatives at the town, we're already doing that. So I think it's good to have this conversation because moving forward, we don't want to develop our plan and our guidelines, which have not been developed yet. There's been nothing laid out yet on what kind of glass or door. That is just absolutely not even part of it at all. So we've got a ways to go here. And there's going to be different levels of degrees that we can set on the properties. And I don't see it being that granular as to type of glass and doors, like at all, or facades. So I just want to take that off the table. But as far as your piece, why you're here tonight, it makes perfect sense to me, and I think it absolutely should be included, and that lens should be applied if we're going to get it right. Because as you said, we don't want it 20, 30 years from now. And I honestly do believe that that piece will be there, but I'm really glad you're here tonight, and I know we're going to discuss the report later, so I'll be asking those questions later on tonight from staff. So, but thank you for being here and for your input.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Timmers. Okay, Councillor Brunet.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is a bit repetitive now, but I do want to thank Mr. Bork because I do believe you're bringing a different lens that I didn't hear at either of the PICs. But what I did hear and what I wanted you to comment on was the fact that we did hear from a lot of these property owners that live in heritage conservation homes or properties that within the HCD, that they felt maybe the program was too restrictive. I'm sure you heard that if you were there. So this just speaks to the fact that we need flexibility, and the report speaks to that. And again, we'll be speaking with Monica and Mr. Bruder, our director, later this evening. But I really think it's important, and if we've got people like you that live in the community with the expertise that you have, I'm not sure where we're going with this for phase 2, but if we're going to do some of this in-house, and we've got someone like you living in the community that we could call on, I think this is a real opportunity. So just wanted to thank you for the perspective that you added to our conversation this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Brunet. And thank you, Mr. Bork. And just to set your mind at ease, unlike, say, Hamilton or areas of Toronto, our infrastructure underground isn't touching 100 years at all. We've done a proactive replacement, in that last little bit where we've replaced all the cast iron. We've got cement line that we're going to, and within the next few years, we should be up and ready to go. So we've got the underground tackled. So with your help, let's tackle the above ground.
Sounds good.
And I would suggest to you that next time that we've got call-outs for the Heritage Committee, step up, put your name forward, because you got a lot to offer.
Okay.
Appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
There being no further delegations, I've got a motion moved by Councillor Michalek. That committee receive and file as information the following delegations regarding King Street Corridor in Beamsville, Heritage Conservation District Study PD 42-43, Carla Mackey and Kevin Bork. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote is now open. And I'm going to close that vote, and that motion carries. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very mumuch, Devan. We will now consider Report PD-42-23 regarding King Street Corridor in Beamsville, Heritage Conservation District Study. The Director of Planning and Development will be providing a presentation. Mr. Bruder, please go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. Here before you now to report on kind of the last part of the first part of looking at and evaluating a heritage conservation district. As council will recall, this came out of some direction provided by all of you to staff to evaluate the potential for a heritage conservation district. At this location, it was chosen to be the optimum one to start with because this is where we've got our highest concentration of properties that are currently on the non-designated list. There's 55 of those within the study area and another 4 that are designated. So speaking of the study area, it essentially, as you're all aware, comprises of the entire urban area of King Street with some minor expansions north and south, then a further expansion just to the east to Bartlett Road in response to comments that we heard throughout the public consultation process. So again, looking at this corridor kind of in totality, looking at different aspects of it, if you look in the report that was completed by our consultant, there's kind of different areas that offer different I guess, attributes or characteristics. On the west end, we've got larger, kind of bigger lots with generous frontages, big setbacks, predominantly residential. Then you've got kind of your central portion that's a little more mixed use, commercial core. We've got that, commercial facade that addresses the street, again, dating back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, when kind of Beamsville experienced its economic boom in some cases, and then further to the east, we've got some contextual value associated there. So the process to date, again, going through this process to evaluate the Heritage Conservation District potential, there's 2 phases, with the first being that evaluation. We embarked on it quite some time ago. This required kind of an inventory of existing properties, some of the attributes, and then looking at some of the criteria that are within the Ontario Heritage Act that must be considered when we look at heritage conservation districts. Some of those things being the architectural value, the rarity of the design, the period in which it can be associated with. There can be design value in terms of exemplary design, construction design, things of that like. There's contextual value associated with the context of the area, maybe being associated with key individuals in Beamsville's past. I think about Jacob Beam, I think about Senator Gibson. Historical value with certain times in Beamsville's evolution, the establishment of the commercial core, that boom that I was talking about. All of these things were considered when looking at all of the properties within the study area. And really the goal of that, the objective, was to identify, the overall value of the study area and which properties contribute to that. So along the way, we looked at, before I get there, we'll go to the second step. So should council decide to proceed, the next step after this one is where we go and form the Heritage Conservation District Plan. That would include a series of guidelines, policies, and that's where this inherent flexibility that's already been talked about this evening comes into play. I'll get into that a little bit more further, but that would be the next step should council wish to proceed there. As you'll see, there is potential to proceed to that step. There is, the criteria have been met by the study area, but again, I'll speak to that a little more in the coming slides. So along the way, when we were evaluating the properties within the study area, Bill 23 came along. So one of the things that happened with Bill 23 required us to go back to the drawing board a little bit in terms of the evaluation, is the goalposts for the evaluation shifted a bit in terms of what the criteria were and how they were to be met, and the threshold. So those values, those criteria that I was speaking about earlier, Bill 23 required at least 25% of the properties within the study area to meet at least 2 of the criteria listed in the Ontario Heritage Act, whereas previously it was only, there wasn't that same threshold. So that required us to go back and reevaluate. It took some time. But again, the results of that indicated that there is feasibility to proceed with a Heritage Conservation District. Again, just to note to this second point here, and you're already well aware of it, we've talked about it in many other meetings, just in terms of the other aspect of Bill 23, which is that any properties that are on the non-designated list, we've got until January 2025, or else they fall off that list and can't be put back on for 5 years. So kind of timely that we're talking about this because the Heritage Conservation District affords a different avenue of protection for those properties if you don't get around to designating all the ones that require it. So a little bit of an added benefit to exploring this route as well. So as you can see, there's been quite a bit of community engagement. We had our first round of Public Information Center towards the end of 2022, shortly after we initiated this whole process. Again, there's been quite a bit of liaison with local historians, with other contextual experts, liaison with our Municipal Heritage Committee. And again, we had to go back to the public once again, once we had to redefine the evaluation that was undertaken. So that occurred as well earlier, or in the summer of this year. And again, dialogue's been ongoing with respect to the property owners in the study area, and that's taken us to where we are today. So what did we hear? We heard a lot of things just with respect to the study area, some recommendations to, again, expand it like we did out to the east, some maybe a little bit of concern that the boundary doesn't extend further south. Concern with respect to how new development plays into this. What is the guidelines and policy framework look like? How does it guide new development? Just general, looking for more information on that. More detailed explanation on the HCD plan process, just in terms of, and we've tried to provide that information in terms of how it looks, certain protections that are afforded, considerations that are made during that process. I'll get into that a little bit more shortly as well. Concerned about a cost and onerous nature to maintain and undertake minor reservations. This was one that obviously resonated with us. Really, and I heard even through the delegation today and some of the dialogue that ensued, some concern about, certain window treatments that are required, certain wood framing of windows, things like that are identified as an attribute, and what happens when, there's an opportunity to replace those, or not an opportunity, but a need rather. Again, it's not staff's intention that we make it so cost prohibitive that property owners can't do it, or it's a significant liability. We want to be able to work with the property owners, because really the intention here is look and feel of the overall study area. It's not always like for like materials that are going to cost a fortune. It's, working together to establish that look and feel that we want to maintain. So there's going to be a significant measure of flexibility in that regard. It's not our intention to be prescriptive on those things. We looked at some of the other things, and you'll see it in the staff report. There was concerns with respect to insurance and property values. We tried to do a little bit of digging on those things from an insurance standpoint. We found, generally speaking, along that same lineage, that when there's requirements for replacements, certain things need to be rebuilt, what have you. As part of insurance claims, there's no requirement to go back to the original materials or anything like that. It's not onerous in that regard either. When it comes to dealing with insurance companies, that's not something that's really implemented by the Ontario Heritage Act either. So moving forward, that's not something that we want to implement. Property values, we looked at a few studies that have been undertaken. For one was an example, University of Waterloo did a study specifically on this, and they found that there was a relatively high level of resiliency when there's market downturns, because when these properties are sought after by prospective buyers, there's definitely, they have an interest in those, and they value them highly, regardless of the market conditions. And another interesting one was that generally, I think it was over 70% of the buildings that were, or the heritage properties that were assessed, performed at or above average or market trends that would be applicable. So that was a good indicator that, just because there's a heritage conservation district or there is a designation on a property, it doesn't mean that the value is going to be reduced of that property. So moving forward, we're here to recommend that we move to the second phase of this whole process, which is actually establishment of the Heritage Conservation District Plan. Again, that would include a series of guidelines. There would be some policies with respect to trying to preserve the overall character of the area, identifying what those attributes are that are associated with the contributing properties. And contributing versus non-contributing, it sounds pretty much exactly how it is, which is the contributing properties. They exude some of those themes, some of those characteristics that were identified through the evaluation phase as being of importance to the corridor, that establish its sense of place, its historical and contextual value. So looking at those and trying to preserve those things. So we would move forward with looking to establish those. We would build off of research that was done during this previous phase. and bring forward a proposed series of guidelines and policies. That would include a robust outreach and consultation process with impacted property owners in the study area and just the general community. We would want to make sure we hear directly from them. We've already heard, as I mentioned before, on a variety of factors. So we would want to make sure that they continue to be consulted with, collaborated with, ensuring that their concerns are heard. Again, we view the property owners in the area, it's a form of partnership. There needs to be a balance between achieving that protection of the identity of the area and the historical value, but at the same time working with the property owners to ensure that they can still work within their properties as they see fit. So we thought this graphic would be helpful. There's really kind of a continuum of these Heritage Conservation District plans in terms of how restrictive you can be or how non-restrictive you can be. And really, it depends on the direction. For me, a lot of it depends on the input we receive in terms of where we end up on this continuum. On one end, you can see that there's just basic demolition protection. We want to make sure we have a lens in which to review properties that are demolished, kind of similar to what we achieve with the non-designated list as it is right now. And then at the other far end, you've got where you do get prescriptive in terms of looking at paint colors, roofing materials, exterior finishes, all of those things. That's not where we want to go. That's not where we ever really envision going. I would probably anticipate that we would be somewhere in between the second and third, right smack in the middle of this continuum in terms of wanting to make sure that we do establish guidelines for new builds and even additions in terms of trying to achieve that overall design that we're looking for. But in terms of how we get there, some of the building materials and things like that, we can be very flexible. So again, it's more about the feel of the area. Obviously, want to preserve the sites that are actually, designated or worthy of designation. That's a given, but providing for an overall flexibility for certain things to happen on those properties. So again, this is just talking about contributing versus non-contributing properties. As you can see, there's a larger amount of properties that we found to be contributing to the overall cultural significance of the study area versus those that weren't. Obviously, with respect to some of the plans and guidelines, those differ in how they're applied to contributing versus non-contributing properties. Non-contributing, there probably wouldn't be too much in the way of a requirement, because usually how it works is in heritage conservation districts, what comes with that is a heritage permitting process. So depending on what a property owner wants to do on their property, there's varying levels and extents of what a heritage permitting process would look like, which is more or less identified here. Again, I wouldn't take this too literally, this particular example, because it will come out of the next stage in terms of how we form our plans and guidelines in terms of what exactly this might look like, but this is just an example. So, when you've got a minor thing such as window replacements that are different materials, things like that, staff would still review it to make sure that it achieves that look and feel, but at the end of the day, it wouldn't be something that it would be delegated to staff. It would be a minor permit. It would be turned around very, very quickly. It's just really a review to make sure that the fundamental principles of the Heritage Conservation District are applied in that circumstance. This is one, when we talk about porches and things like that, I think it would vary again based on how we form the policies and guidelines. Typically speaking, some porches can have a lot of design or architectural value just the way that they're built. So in those situations, there might be a need for a little bit more of a deeper dive into, if they want to remove their porch, they want to completely, go with a new look and format. I think that would require a lens in which to review, but otherwise, if it's a very similar design, or maybe it's on a property where there isn't architectural value associated with the porch, it wouldn't be, there would either be a minor permit going through staff or none at all. So, and then you go into things such as demolition. That's a little bit more involved. We want to make sure that we have an opportunity to review the attributes of that particular property in detail. And then with new construction, the same thing. We want to make sure that it's hitting all the themes from a design standpoint that are identified for the study area. So just a quick snapshot of how things could be evaluated, but again, it could really vary based on the next phase. So next steps, typically you retain a consultant to initiate the second stage, which is to build off of what's already been done and apply a list of guidelines and policies that are going to be brought forward for public consultation. But I think it's important for us as staff to take ownership to start this process in terms of doing a lot of the project initiation, doing a lot of the outreach to the property owners, to the community. So that's something that we want to get going on next year. We want to retain that in-house. So the idea is to do as much as we can with that particular aspect and take it as far as we can go. And once we're at a point where we're ready to start finalizing those guidelines and policies, we would likely retain, we could go a few routes. We could retain AECOM or someone similar as a consultant to help us through the last part because they have heritage expertise and designation, or we do have a heritage consultant on retainer that we would use for things like peer reviewing designation reports and things like that. I also would mention, we're looking to leverage, and Councillor Brunet, we conversed on this a little bit. There is a local school called Willowbank. They specialize in heritage preservation. They provide education on that to build up a professional credentials for people looking to enter employment into that particular industry. So working through Grimsby's planners who already use them to help write designation reports, we want to leverage and build a relationship there, which will also assist in going through this process and bringing in kind of a different lens into the whole consideration. We heard today climate change. I couldn't agree more. I think it's a good piece to include in a heritage conservation district plan. Something that, to be honest, in our research to date, we haven't seen a lot of, but I think maybe that's not an indication of whether or not it should happen. Maybe it's just a newer and more adaptive and innovative way to look at them. So that's something we're going to be exploring in great detail as we move forward. And then finally, there were also a few Part 4 designations for some properties that it was recommended that we work with that came out of this. They're not included within the Heritage Conservation District Plan, but just a couple properties in the vicinity that we should look at in greater detail from a designated standpoint, which we're going to be undertaking. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Matt. Very good. And both you and Mr. Bork said I would rather be a leader than a follower. So let's include that. And you know what? Let's set the bar. Let others follow us. So I think we've got a good foundation. So it's lit up like a Christmas tree. Councillor Timmers, start us off, please.
Thank you, Chair Pachariva. Through you to Director Bruder. So this is a huge report and a lot of information, the presentation isn't, but the report is massive. So from what I understand, the second phase is where we now create a plan with criteria and policy with public consultation. So when we see that chart, we don't go to the chart on page 9, I believe it was, but it shows where was it? The degree of protection. Where is it? Yeah, the green one. So, if you're looking at the most stringent, I know people get worried and they get afraid of like, oh my goodness, this is going to be very costly and hard to manage. But you have just said that staff are looking between the second and the third. And that, again, would be with public consultation. So I think that's fair. And is that where the climate considerations would fit into our policies? Like, where would that fit in there? I'm just curious on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think it would fit in somewhere there. To be honest with you, ever since that's been brought up, which was a great thing to bring up tonight, my mind's been kind of working in overdrive to figure out exactly where it fits in. If I look at some of the properties in the study area, I think there's inherent benefits from looking at climate change. For some, it's going to be easier to implement. I talked about some of those large frontages, more green space within some of the lots. I think that's a critical factor, even just when I consider a permeability standpoint for some climate change considerations, but there might be some challenges to tackle in the commercial core. So, I think we can achieve that lens without getting more prescriptive than what we had initially envisioned, if that's what you're asking.
Okay. All right, another question. So just, we're looking at a lot of properties, right? There's 183 properties within this area. Only 113 of them meet 2 criteria, so that would be, they'd be worthy of designation. So you have ones that are part of it that are contributing and non-contributing. And I think that's just a point I want to make, is that if you're a non-contributing property, none of this really applies to you, unless you wanted to build a new house on the location. Is that how I'm reading this?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, I think it would come out in the next phase, but that's probably more what we would be looking at, yeah, if there's a major change to the property, because it's a non-contributing, it might still have some architectural feature that is consistent with the overall feel of the area. But yes, generally speaking, when you talk about certain elements of the property, it would be a lot less stringent in terms of what would be included in the guidelines for those non-contributing properties. So yeah, probably more so on the demolition and new construction side.
Because I think some people have some fear, thinking, oh my goodness, I'm in that boundary, I'm in there, what does this mean? So, if you're not designation worthy, then it's not really going to be affecting you. Last question, Mr. Chair. So we know that in January 2025, everything comes off the registry. So if our HCD is not complete by January 2025, what happens within our plan? I'm not really sure what would happen at that point.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that's a good question, and one we were batting around for a while as well, and we actually looked to confirm it. We reached out to the industry, we reached out to legal. January 2025, yeah, those 55 properties that are within the study area that are on the non-designated list, they fall off that list. But the good thing is, the Heritage Conservation District provides another ability. So what happens with that also is there's 5 years before they can be put back on it.
Right.
But the Heritage Conservation District Plan, the establishment of that is a completely different process under the Ontario Heritage Act. So it's kind of a different level for us to protect them with. Yeah, they might fall off our non-designated list, meaning we probably wouldn't proceed with individual designations for each one, but when we look at the district as a whole, they would still be captured in there, and we're still totally able to include them in a Heritage Conservation District even after Jan 1, 2025. So again, they would still be protected through that process. But again, a little bit different than they were if we were going to go down the individual designation route, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because again, in the end, we're trying to balance what the protection measures are versus the ability for property owners to be able to work with their property. So it kind of affords us a little bit more flexibility in a sense.
That's good. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Councillor Renchema.
Oh, thank you, Chair Patriva. So I have a question about, so in March of 2022, we enacted an interim control bylaw for this area, so that, and then we extended it 1 year. So I believe that's up in March of 2024.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's actually up now. There is no more.
It was a year and a half?
Yeah, there's no more interim control bylaw, no.
Okay, so that means we have to entertain development applications if they come in on properties that aren't protected currently under the Heritage Conservation District. And I have another question, and that's a question, but also a question further to that. Has the province considered allowing any, and have we asked if the province would consider us to allow us to extend an interim control bylaw that I guess has already expired, to get policies in place?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think it's going to be possible to extend an interim control bylaw. However, there is another avenue that we're exploring now. It's to pass a bylaw with respect to formation of a Heritage Conservation District. I'm literally in the middle of exploring it now, but in the interim, I also want to highlight, the good thing is that for the next year, we still have demolition protection for those on the non-designated list. That's still the case, so we still have a measure of protection for those specific sites.
Yeah.
So I think all things considered, we're probably going to have an avenue to make sure there's coverage, but I don't have details yet, unless, Monica, I don't know if you want to chime in with anything else that you've found with that. We were just looking at it, Councillor, as
Okay.
an option.
Okay.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. No, we haven't received a response yet from legal. We just asked today. So once we do receive a response, I can let you know.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question, Mr. Chair. You were said earlier on, Matt, in the report, and I'm trying to see where this is, that there's 4 properties that are currently designated within the Heritage Conservation District study area, so the red outlined area. So I only see 1 the purple one. Where are the other three?
Through
And that's
Ms.
on page, sorry for everybody else, it's page 3 of the report, the image that shows the,
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd probably have to get back to you on that, Counselor. I don't know, I can't recall off the top of my head. I was just going off of what was identified in our report. Perhaps maybe Monica can look at that, and then she can update you a little bit later as we continue with the questions, if that's okay.
yeah, that's great. And one more question, Mr. Chair, my third question, thank you. Further to Councillor Timmer's question earlier on regarding the properties that are not contributing, could it not be the case that if, and you said this earlier on in your answer, that unless there's some major development on the property, that a property that's not contributing, that's a non-contributing property within the Heritage District study area or within the eventual district plan isn't affected by the plan, but would it not be the case if, for example, a house is, an extension was being built on a house, or a house is being torn down and a new house is being built, or any kind of development on that property we may require, I don't know if we will or not, that a heritage impact assessment be part of that application?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that's probably a lens that we're going to have to look at those potential scenarios with, just because the way it is now, even when you have, forget the Heritage Conservation District, but when you have a development that's proposed adjacent to a designated property, then yes, you have to at least identify any potential impacts to the cultural heritage value of that neighboring property. But I think, we can establish that as part of the guidelines that we would just apply when we're reviewing new applications for new development for those non-contributing properties. So I think there's an opportunity there to streamline what that would look like instead of having to go through an onerous process. I think we could probably come up with a pre-existing set of criteria for evaluation to ensure that we take that into account. So that's something else we'll explore too.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Brunei.
Thank you, Chair Patriva, through you to Mr. Bruder. I hope you give me a little bit of latitude here on a couple of two-part questions that I hope you just refer to as one question. So through you to Mr. Bruder, so with regards to costs, we're 48 hours before going into our first budget deliberation on Wednesday night. So with regards to costs, phase 1, we are now completed. So what is our bill that we have incurred so far to date?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the initial scope when we initiated the project was $80,000, and then we had to increase the budget to account for Bill 23 to go back to the evaluation, hold another PIC. So all in, the budget was approximately $108,000 for phase 1.
108. So through you, Councillor Patriva, my second part of my first question, I'm wondering if you could give us an estimate if we were to proceed with phase 2. And I appreciate the fact that you're talking about doing some of this in-house. I really do. What are you anticipating? What is the estimated cost of phase 2?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we tried to look around to see what other examples might be applicable in terms of others that are undertaking the second phase with, a similar amount of properties in consideration. We generally found that number to be around 70 to 100,000 for phase 2. However, that doesn't take into account some of the in-house work that I've been referring to. It's our goal, and unfortunately, I don't have a figure for you in terms of how much that might reduce it by. But again, to bring that cost down quite a bit by trying to take on as much as we can in-house. So that is the goal.
Thank you for that response. So, second question, Chair. Mr. Bruder, I appreciate the fact that you're saying that you're going to engage our staff with the next phase. I was at both of the public meetings. I believe the first pick that we had in November of 2022, we had about 40 participants, and the second one in June, there was about 17. What I have a concern with is there wasn't that many people that attended the PICs that actually live in the HCD. The Mackeys were there and very supportive, and I appreciate that. But my concern as we move forward is that we're going to have people coming out of the woodwork that said, "Hey, I live in a house along this sector, and we don't know anything about it." So through you, Chair, as we go forward with this, and Director Bruder, you remember 2019, Councillor Timmers and I and yourself and the CAO, we walked the whole district in the pouring rain one afternoon. I don't think it's too far-fetched to be putting door knockers on some of these residential doors to engage these people. I really think it's important that we engage these people as we go forward, if we do go forward with Phase 2, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I agree, and I was actually thinking the same thing. It's door knockers, it's maybe hand delivery of correspondence, providing notification for opportunities to participate. I think we do all of those things. I think we're going to be able to do all those things, in addition to our normal channels of communication with residents that we undertake. So your comments are appreciated, and I was thinking the same thing in terms of actual specific notification that's delivered directly to the property owners in the area.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I'm not insinuating that we haven't done a good job. Like, we take out full-page ads in the newspaper. We've got, we've got Speak Up Lincoln, and we're trying to get the message out. But at the end of the day, I just wish there would have been more people that are living in the actual HCD that would have participated there, that could have had a voice and participated in some of these exercises that we participated in. So I think that's good. So through you, Chair, my third question to Mr. Bruder. With regards to page 38 in the report under 2.72, which is constraints and challenges, it talks about, what some of the policies and procedures that actually Mr. Bork spoke about in terms of, some of the things that he'd like to see in terms of climate change and sustainability and all that, preservation. But I'm just wondering, Mr. Bruder, if you could speak to, we do have, some tools currently in the planning department. We've had some development, and as Councillor Rengimis suggested, we did put a pause on some of this demolition. We had some work happening in and around, as an example, Woodburn Cottage. So we were able to navigate some of that development, through some of the planning tools we have. I'm just wondering if you could speak to, when it talks about, constraints and challenges on page 38, it talks about detailed policies and guidelines that can be included in the HCD plan, which will be formed through community consultation. Policies and/or guidelines may include direction in the retention of historical facades, demolitions, additions, infills, public realm, maintenance, accessibility, and sustainability. So what extra teeth are we going to have? What extra tools in our toolbox through the HCD is going to be added to what we already have? I'm really interested to hear what your comments are on that.
Yeah, that's a good question, and through you, Mr. Chair, I'll try to answer it as clearly as possible. So a couple of things. First of all, when we talk about the tools that we have at our disposal, you're right, we do have some when it comes to urban design, when it comes to compatibility. But first of all, I think what the Heritage Conservation District does is it ties those together and it makes them relatable, specific to that particular area and its identity and the attributes that we've identified that we want to preserve. Another thing that I'd highlight is when you mentioned teeth. As you know, with some of the changes to planning policies now, even based on, the policies that we have in our official plan document that came before these legislation updates, there's been some reductions in our ability to influence things like urban design, architectural detailing, landscaping. I think the Heritage Conservation District provides us with another means in which we can address that in this specific area, being specific to the values that we've identified. So, again, I think it ties it all together. And that's not to say we don't still work towards improvements on those things with development applications outside of this area using our tools at our disposal. It's just that I think this kind of addresses a little of that provincial policy change and again ties everything specifically into the area and provides us with a better framework that we can utilize to guide developers and in some cases to require through a permitting process that they adhere to the principles. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Brunet. And your points about trying to get more engagement are worthwhile. I mean, this came up with Argobor Ditch PIC, is that, I think maybe nothing short of a registered letter will get people's attention. Because we heard that, is that, well, I get a notification from the town, I don't read it. Or, the local papers, well, I don't read those, I see them as a nuisance, I throw them in the recycling box. I don't even open them up. So something to go above and beyond to contact these people, because it's a direct effect to them. And then, like Councilor Bernay said, at the 23rd hour, or 11th hour, or whatever, time frame you want to say of, the clock is ticking, that they come in and they go, I didn't know anything. So, yeah, got to do anything we can there to get that engagement. So, Councilor Michalak.
Thank you very much, Chair Brunet, through you to Matt. So I understand why we got here, how we got here, and the speed that we needed to get here with Bill 23 or whatever it was. I guess I still need to be a little bit more convinced on this, because I take a look at what we're currently doing and developments or applications that we've looked at or consider, and we do a lot of this already. I look at it might be a little higher than some people wanted, but that 6-story building on the top of Ontario Street seems to look decent, seems to look good in character. I look at the other 2 applications that are more of an intensification of vacant property, where we had conditions of what it looked like and fit and feel, and developers were receptive to that and brought forward designs that were respecting that. So I'm just concerned about this possibly being red tape for everybody, and whether or not it's truly necessary, especially if somebody owns a house or a heritage sort of a designatable property, and they're not interested in maintaining it or restoring it, it's just going to take longer for that property to fall in on itself. So what are your thoughts to that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. You're right, Councillor. We do try to look at things like compatibility. We try to make improvements on built form, on massing, and all those things. But I think really, and some of your comments too, with respect to some of the buildings that have been built, some of the sites that have been developed, some people would say they look good. Some people maybe wouldn't agree as much. They don't like the scale, what have you. There's a varying level of opinions, and that's totally respectable. But again, I think what this does, this process, why I see merit behind it is, first of all, we've gone through the first phase, and we've identified what it is in that area that kind of makes it different, makes it special, what the historical value is. We've gone through that exercise. And the next step now is to, we make those considerations from a design standpoint, from a fit standpoint, a built form, what's the architecture, key features. But now we're tying it into a specific kind of key set of attributes and values for a corridor. And to me, that goes a little bit further, because you've now undertaken a little bit more of a, call it granular evaluation of the properties themselves. So you're a little bit more informed, and you can, provide a little bit more guidance when it comes to redevelopment over time. In terms of red tape, that's kind of the point of what I'm trying to make tonight, is I'm really trying to balance first, the opportunity to try to preserve those values in this district that we've identified, or this study area. But at the same time, I do recognize too that, there are some things that would be prohibitive to property owners. There are considerations we need to make to avoid that red tape. And, if they need to do things to their property from a maintenance standpoint, even from a general improvement standpoint, you mentioned, properties where people don't want to maintain them. I would contend a lot of the ones that own these older buildings, they do. They take a lot of pride, from what I've seen, generally speaking, in their properties, but I think the end result is we don't want to make it harder for them, and we don't intend to at all through this process, for them to maintain and upkeep those properties. So that's really the balance that we're looking to strike here. But again, to me, the advantage is now we've got a quantified set of values that from which we can build even more specific guidelines that pertain to this corridor.
So through you, so that said, there was talk about earlier non-contributing properties, and I would assume that includes vacant lots as defined as a non-contributing property. So by having this sort of plan in place, would a building like the Jordan Museum be able to be built in this area?
Through you, Mr. Chair. That's a good question. It would depend on what we put forth in terms of a framework, but if I generally look at the architecture, if I look at the dwelling types, if I look at the built form in the area, probably not exactly like that, just by virtue of what we'd be looking at from a composition standpoint. That is, I don't see a lot of that particular design in the area, so we would probably try to inform the architecture a little bit differently to fit in better with what's there.
Okay, so I get, it sounds like we're looking to keep downtown Beamsville to remain the same for the next 50 years, or maintain that.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, I don't think that's the intention either. I think we recognize that redevelopment's going to happen. There is going to be change. But I think what we're trying to do is establish parameters in which that change can occur. We don't, we're trying to maintain cohesion within the corridor. So, yeah, it'll definitely change over time, 100%. And this is not and never has been a tool to hinder that or get in the way. It's just meant to help shape it according to what we value that's there.
So just one more question during this round, and then, so it goes back to engagement. What our ECDev department weigh in on this? Did the BIA weigh in on this? Did we have, when I look, there's 52% of respondents on Speak Up Lincoln. Like, these are people from all over Lincoln. Like, how targeted, was the response or the support from those within this area that will have this on their title property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did try to target property owners in the area. Like I said, we went through our traditional outreach methods as well. When you talk about our economic development department, obviously planning has a close relationship with them. They're kept up to date on our initiatives, and they'll continue to, that'll continue to happen as we go forward if council decides to move towards the second phase. So in terms of targeted outreach, definitely looking at, yes, the BIA, the property owners in the area. We're going to continue to do that. And as I mentioned, I think maybe we can even drill down a little bit more to try to encourage more feedback. That'll be the goal, because this first stage was really the establishment of identifying, is there potential and what's there in terms of values that we should be preserving. This next phase will be balancing how we do that and balancing everyone's interests accordingly. So that'll be where the targeted outreach really comes into play.
Wow, that's why I'm worried, because the next phase, we're all in, is what I gather. So that's for now. Thank you, Chair.
Just to clarify, Mr. Chair, you're not necessarily all in. I mean, there's still going to be an opportunity for council to provide their input and even adopt the plan or not. Maybe, there's other options that can always be evaluated at any point. You're not anywhere near a tipping point where, yeah, we're committed, we have to approve this. There could be other things, Councilor Brunei mentioned, well, you already have some tools. Maybe, is there an opportunity? We won't be able to do it as fulsomely as we would with a Heritage Conservation District plan, but, is there ability to maybe add on to some of those? Limited now with provincial regulation around how we can influence architecture and landscaping, but, always things we can look at. So I don't want to leave council with the thought that they're 100%, in a corner and have to go this route. It's just right now we're recommending that we proceed to the next phase and start to look at what the guidelines and policies will look like and what the results of the outreach will be.
Okay. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Bruder, thank you very much for your assistance on this presentation. Just a couple points again. I think, again, a few things that I've heard. I do love the aspect that we have the ability through this to control some of the outcomes within the designated area as far as future development goes. I love the fact that we have the ability to assist some of our businesses in building up and improving their facades, some of their historical sites. I am an optimist to think that there is not going to be as much red tape as I foresee that there might be. But my question is, as we go into this phase two, assuming this proceeds further, what do you think the budgetary constraints will be for some of that assistance? I know that, again, it has to be decided on what kind of programs we're going to be running, assisting with, but has there been any thought of potential yearly budget as far as what we require to maintain some of these heritage designated properties? Any thought on that at all?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's something that we're going to be considering as we move forward. Should we move forward to the next phase? I can tell you, generally speaking, some of the things we are going to look at. We are going to revisit our facade program. Is there an opportunity for refinement so that it better targets what needs to happen in terms of assisting the property owners? I think it's included in the report, but another thing we've encountered elsewhere is there is some tax relief incentives that municipalities have provided in other circumstances where that provides an ability and a little bit of assistance for residents to help maintain their properties, giving them a little bit of a break on that cost. I don't have it quantified yet in terms of what that might amount to in terms of a budgetary item that might need to be incorporated moving forward, but it's something that would probably come out of our next phase. But those are things that we would look at as part of it.
Thank you for that. And a follow-up, Mr. Chair?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Russell.
Oh, sorry, follow-up, Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
follow-up. I thought you said you were done. Okay, I go back to the report, Councillor, where they were offering free taxes and water for 10 years, and I figured your hair stood on end. So go ahead.
It did. What little hair I had left definitely did stand up. But what I wanted to say was, is there any other levels of government that could, or grant opportunities that could offset some of those future costs? Just as we're starting to if we're going to walk down that path, is there anything that we can start looking forward to that there may be some offsetting of some of those costs that we're going to be outlaying?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Not that I know of, Councillor, but, I think this whole dialogue about, some assistance for the property owners that would be within these districts is something that occurs everywhere for every municipality that's trying to implement these. So, am I optimistic something could come forward? Maybe marginally, but at this time, it seems to be the responsibility for any type of assistance normally falls to the local area municipality. I know even from our facade grants from a regional perspective now, they're not offering their portion anymore. It's just the town portion that's available. So is that any type of indicator? I'm not sure. But again, something we can continue to explore as we move forward, but at the moment, no, nothing that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you for that. And just one last comment, Mr. Chair, through you. One of the things I'm concerned about is, again, right now we are, again, with the economy, with interest rates and inflation, we are facing some financial pressures from a municipality standpoint. And I'm concerned that if we start building out this in phase 2 under current restraints, we may not either have the ability to create a program that's going to be something fruitful that will, again, or assist all people that may be required, or it just may be too cumbersome that it's something that municipality may not be able to afford, and we have to then cut back and may not be able to meet everybody's expectations. So again, I'm a little bit hesitant right now, but again, I think overall it seems like we're moving on a slow path, and we do have that ability at the next phase to pause, again, adjust whatever those requirements are, discuss, get more discussion with the community to find exactly what all their needs are, and see if we can find something that fits everybody's requirements. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bruder.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Russell, for that. And remember, we're early planning stages on this, and a lot of time to have that, and hopefully, like you say, there will be some other levels of government that will step forward. The City of Toronto had their deal finally hammered out with the province and the federal government to get some money. So when we go to Roma and Ogra and AMO, this can be another thing on our wish list to ask. Okay, Councillor Reimer.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. Thanks, Matt, for the presentation, for being here tonight. A couple of questions, just one for clarification. And on the second page of the slides this evening, you had the extended Heritage District boundary. What determined that exact outline? And I only asked that for a couple of reasons. Was it strictly Bill 23, or the one of them follows property line, the other one sort of follows an industrial zigzag? Just a little more background on why those are included in the extended boundary.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think generally speaking, that was just some of the feedback that we had received at the public information centers. We had some kind of mapping available at those meetings that could be marked up. It was a comment that was made. We worked with our consultant to kind of legitimize that and see if it was a proper move to make, and that's why we extended the study area to the east. Again, generally speaking, it was more taking a fulsome look at the corridor, the zigzagging of the property line. Again, I think that was just through some input that we received, a line drawn on a map. It could even be slightly revised if need be, but that's where it came from, Councillor.
Another question, if I may, Chair Patriva, just along the lines of Councillor Brunet brought up, I have a concern with that as well. And you mentioned, Matt, inherent flexibility, which I don't doubt, but I think there's still, as well-intentioned as we are, the drive, and I would tend to agree, to be less restrictive as opposed to being more restrictive. There's still going to be gray areas. There's still going to be areas that, a homeowner wants to replace a black slate roof with a white steel roof, which makes all the sense in the world, but somebody in our planning department or building staff wants it black, and there's going to be disagreements on those kind of things. And I realize that's getting down the road a fair bit, but some of these cases are things that have actually happened in the region of Niagara. Not specifically that, but disagreements over what heritage adaptation looks like. And I like the lens of climate change, but there brings a whole bunch of, especially interior, we start doing heating and cooling, that brings on a whole lot of questions. So I'm going to boil it down. Is there a appeal process available for, and my concern would be homeowners in this district who, if you're going to buy into the district, once we've established it, should we establish the Heritage District? And I'm not opposed to Heritage Districts. I guess I would like to protect something like Councillor Brunet had mentioned, those people who are in there who might have constraints on their property, that we're going to impose on them by doing this. And there's lots of them. We talked about development, right? Somebody's got a house that doesn't fit heritage designation. It's just poorly constructed, and they want to take it down and put something else up. And this is going to put, whether we like this, will put some, they won't have the freedom that they have outside of that designation. So is there an appeal process, or would there be an appeal process available to homeowners should there be some type, as well-intentioned as we're trying to be with this, is there some appeal process available for them? Sorry, that was long-winded, Matt, but.
No, that's okay. Through you, Mr. Chair, there is an appeal process in those circumstances. And some of the things you talked about, especially when you're talking heating and cooling, some interior renovations, I think that's where we're really going to see maximized flexibility. That's not something we want to get in the way of in terms of them having the ability to service their dwelling. If they want to, they've got an oil furnace, they want to put in, a heat pump or something like that. Well, that's, again, not something that we want to get in the way of. But, some of your comments around the roof, that's got the climate change lens, as you inferred. So that's something we're going to look to build into it. I don't have an exact idea yet of what that will look like. But again, you are correct in that there would be a little bit of an extra lens when reviewing, a site that's torn down, maybe one of those old buildings in disrepair that's non-contributing with a new building. We want to make sure we're, again, achieving the look and feel. So that is true, but trying to maximize the flexibility in which they do that. So, but there is an appeal process, yes.
And a follow-up, if I may, Councillor Patriv, and who is that board, or what is that, what do they appeal to?
I'm going to actually defer to Monica to answer that one.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. It would be through to the tribunal.
Or the OT, okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Matt.
No worries, Councillor Reimer. Okay, I see a couple of councillors back again, so these are going to be questions that haven't been asked by anyone else, correct? Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair. So just to kind of add on to some of Councillor Russell's comments, through you, Chair, to Mr. Bruder. So Matt, you mentioned a couple times, you said we're not in a corner and we're not all in. Full disclosure, I'm on the Heritage Committee, and along with Councillor Timmers, I was one of the councillors that brought this motion forward to look at a Heritage Conservation District. And at the time when we looked at doing this, we talked about proactively managing change and ensuring that growth and conservation can coexist in the town of Lincoln, while conserving the Beamsville small-town character and charm. As we sit here today, 22 months after that fact, I believe that we still have an important role in looking at that mandate. But we're also taxpayers, all of us, everyone in this room, everybody watching at home tonight. So through you, Chair, I asked Mr. Bruder, you say we're not all in, we're not in a corner, but we also know that the clock is ticking on some of these changes that affect heritage properties and how some of them are coming off. But in terms of what we're actually talking about this evening, in your opinion, is there an opportunity? We've completed phase one. We don't know. We know the region is not continuing along with their incentive program. They've stopped the pot. We're talking about grants. We're talking about going to different opportunities for funding and grants. But these are difficult times. I know everyone at home is dealing with with looking at rising interest rates and food costs and everything else that goes with it. So, is there an opportunity to take a bit of a pause here, or is that a mistake that we need to continue to move at this point? Is there an opportunity as we go into budget, not knowing what this incentive program is going to look like beyond 2024? Is there an opportunity to hit a bit of a pause button here?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think there is an opportunity to take a little bit of a pause. You mentioned some of the timelines that we're working with. A lot of that is on that whole non-designated list. The properties that are on there, they'll fall off as of Jan 1, 2025. But again, as I mentioned, there are kind of two different processes here. Yes, we lose that protection. We don't have our interim control bylaw in place. So technically speaking, if a development application comes, we won't have those guidelines and policies that we're looking to develop. So is there a little bit of risk there in terms of a redevelopment proposal happening within this time frame? There is. But ultimately speaking, there is an ability to take a pause, I think, generally speaking, from a development perspective. What's the level of risk for the short term with the market conditions the way they are? I'm not sure it's a huge one. You could see a few here and there, but that is a risk that council would have to assume if they choose to take a pause. From my perspective, it's possible. Also, when you mentioned some of the tough times, I agree. When we're looking at this, I think there's two things to kind of consider with that. First of all, we're going to try to, again, form this plan, should we proceed with it, in a way that's not overly onerous or expensive for the property owners to be within that area. That is a priority. So I'm hoping with that, maybe the need for some of the assistance, some of the incentives can be addressed a little bit just through how we form the framework. But moving forward, these types of assistance programs, we can even work towards identifying what they are, but maybe we pause those for a little bit. I mentioned we're going to try to do some work in-house next year on this. So, that's something that we're willing to take on instead of assuming a cost for a third-party consultant to come in at the earlier stages. We'll try to undertake those. So there's a little bit of an opportunity there, a kind of see how it goes for those initial stages if we choose to go down that road. So all those things considered, yeah, there's certainly potential for you to take a pause.
So through you, Chair, just an additional comment then. So is it safe to say that if council were to go through with a vote tonight to give staff the ability to move to phase two, that you're not going to be entering into a contract with AECOM anytime soon, committing to $100,000? Is that a fair statement?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the idea that I was moving forward with was that we would take 2024 and try to deal with a lot of the initial phases, looking at, again, the outreach with the property owners. I feel it's good practice, too, when we're doing that outreach. It's good that it comes from staff rather than a third-party consultant, so that we're the ones reaching out. So, again, it wasn't my thought that we would be spending money on a consultant in 2024. My thought was in 2024, we would take that opportunity to do the work that we can in-house.
And just one additional comment through you, Chair. So through you to either Mr. Bruder or to the CAO. So therefore, that it would be, it would be under the understanding that before we take a next step, that it would have to come back for council for ratification or approval and a vote on that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brunei. Councillor Michalak.
Thank you very much for allowing me a second opportunity. So, like, I'm still, you know, I still need to be convinced here. So, like, when I read this report, and this report is, I gotta say, it's very in-depth, very detailed, and there's a lot to it. But when I read Table 4 of all the criterias that are to be met, and at least 2 of those criteria out of 9 need to be met, and only 64% or 61% of those properties met 2 or more. Is that a strong case for a the creation of a heritage conservation district? I feel like 2 out of 9 is limping in. Like I'm like looking at numbers and looking at percentages. Like I feel like it's more than half of the properties meet 2 out of 9 criterias. And I read all the criterias, and those 2 properties seem to fall into the same sort of 2. Those 61% properties seem to fall in the same 2 categories. Like, is this a strong case, or are we limping in?
Through you, Mr. Chair. It depends on how you want to look at that, Councillor. When you look at, and again, that threshold, that 2 out of 9, only 25% of the properties in the study area are required to meet that to warrant an HCD. You know, that's what the threshold is for the Ontario Heritage Act. And now we've got a study area that yields a little over 60%, as you highlighted. So I would say, in that context, that's a fairly strong case. I'm not sure quite how that measures up to maybe some other heritage conservation districts, but the only other thing that I would offer, again, is that this was by far the highest concentration of properties that are on the non-designated list was in this area. That's why we started with it. So based on that premise too, I would say there's a pretty strong of a case. If you were going to implement a heritage conservation district in the town of Lincoln, this would be where you would do it, or at least where you would start.
Okay, it's just when I go to typical conservation areas like, you know, Walker Mill and Windsor, or like different, Hamilton has several, Toronto has several. It's a tourist draw. It's an identifiable area that, you know, we want to maintain this, and everyone's all in. So that's with regards to that. And then final question is, when changing the title on properties, doing some of the research I've been doing, is there an effect on renewing mortgages with banking in terms of if you were to renew a mortgage and now your property falls under a heritage district or has that on title? Is there any concern about mortgage renewals?
Through you, Mr. Chair. A good question, considering that, you know, from the market research that we saw that showed these properties generally retain their property value well compared to the overall market. You know, I wouldn't think there would be any impacts on mortgage renewal and financing options because there's no perceived dip in property value or anything like that. If anything, I think some of the residents were right to think of maybe insurance instead as a potential issue. But again, that is a little bit more of a complex component. And again, our research shows generally it doesn't, but you know, insurance also comes into play generally with older properties in the first place when you get to the older wiring and certain things and being insurable or not. But mortgage values, no, renewal, sorry, no, I wouldn't perceive any issues with that.
Okay, fair enough. So just my thoughts are, I'm similar to Councillor Brunei in that pause idea, like moving forward, but like when it comes to spending more money or approving more in-depth funding of this, I'd want to make sure that I have the opportunity to look at that closer. Thank you.
And we will, Councillor. And as you heard both the CAO and Director Bruder say, at this point, it's going to be done in-house, so there's no budgetary ask. So we'll have plenty of time to revisit that. Councillor Renshima.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. And my question is further to what was just mentioned just now about the budget for anything moving forward. What was the original scope of the contract with AECOM? Was it just to do what's been done so far? Okay. Yeah, so it would have to go out for another RFP right? If we were to move forward, RFP would have to be in our budget, et cetera?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I think, we would probably have to reevaluate what exactly it looks like based on how much work we're able to achieve ourselves in-house. That would impact what the scope would be and the cost, but that's definitely a strong possibility that we would have to do that.
So at this point, there's nothing identified in any of our previous budgets that would go to a consultant for this next step anyway, right?
That's right, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriva. So I'm just listening to all the comments, and I just go back to our council priorities. And one of our council priorities is to bring awareness, build awareness within the community on our responsibility to protect our rich history and our assets. And that's why Councillor Bernay and I brought this motion forward for the HCD in the very beginning, was when we did that walk and we realized the assets that we have in our town. And we've done phase 1, and now I'm hearing, people bringing about pausing. And I don't understand why we would need to pause, as this is not a budgetary item at this point. And I personally think we need to move forward and continue with the work that we've started as it aligns with our council priorities. We've already done phase 1. And there's a lot of public consultation to come forward, and I think I would not support pausing this work. We know when we pause, at the end of the day, it ends up costing us more money. And we are under the gun for our deadline to meet, the registry restrictions that will happen. And we've seen applications come forward where houses are being taken down and lots are joined and bigger projects are going in. And this is the kind of stuff that why we thought this was important, to maintain and protect our assets and our history. So those are my comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just again, one quick follow-up through you to Director Bruder. I'm going to be devil's advocate a little bit. How much of this could we accomplish with a facade improvement program and the site plan approval process that we currently have?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think we can accomplish certain things, but when it comes to, again, architectural control, landscaping detail, we're getting less and less able to deal with that through those processes that you mentioned. But again, my thought would be that this Heritage Conservation District plan would be another avenue to work towards that in a little more detail, making it a little more location specific to the corridor itself and the key attributes. So, we could achieve certain things, and we've been able to do so, like I said, even though notwithstanding some provincial policy changes, we still work with applicants on those things as much as we possibly can. But I just think this adds another layer of detail, and it really brings to the forefront the features that are identified in the report that's before you tonight. The facade grant, that's, quite frankly, that's not a significant amount of money to address some of the things that a property owner may need to address. So I think the scope is a little bit limited too if you rely solely on that. I think it needs to be a little bit more of a suite of things approach, if that makes sense.
It does, and through your last comment, Mr. Chair, it does, but that last comment scares me a little because, again, depending on the richness of those future asks, and again, it may not be something that we are able to support long-term or short-term, maybe long-term once the economy improves and inflation drops a little bit and things get a little bit better for everybody. But I'm concerned, again, I know there is no ask right now, so I'm okay moving forward as it is right now because we still do have the ability to pull back a bit or to control the outcome. I'm just concerned that those costs are going to be far higher than what we can afford, and I just want to make sure that we're mindful of our taxpayers' dollars going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. So, There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Brunei to receive and file report PD 42-23 regarding the Beamsville King Street Corridor Heritage Conservation District Study, and direct staff to commence the second phase of the Heritage Conservation District Study, being the Heritage Conservation District Plan and Guidelines, and direct staff to review the listed properties outside of the HCD study area, including Mount Osborne Cemetery at 4230 William Street and the former schoolhouse at 4240 Academy Street for consideration under Part 4 designation. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote. Councillor Renchema, I see you in here. Do you have a question? Because we've already called the vote and you've been in twice. So we've already said we're just receiving and filing this. There is no monetary ask. So what would your question be? I've got to get Councillor Russell out first. Okay, can you do it? Okay, now it is.
Okay, so not a question, if you'll allow me just a comment before the vote. I wanted to say, and I wanted to say this earlier on, that in many ways this was very forward-thinking to bring this motion at the time that it was brought forward, because we really didn't foresee a lot of the powers that were going to be taken away from us with provincial legislation. So I'm happy that this work is being done. Thank you.
Thank you for your support, Councillor Renchema. So I'll now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Councillor Regima, I'm just waiting for your vote.
I just clicked.
I did not. Thank you. I'll close that vote and that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Devan. Mr. Brody, you're still up. So we will now consider report PD 39-23, provincial legislation updates and potential impacts. Director of Planning and Development, Mr. Matt Bruder, will be giving us a presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we've had a few, yet more, provincial legislation changes that have come forward. I just wanted to give you a very brief overview of the key features and a little bit of analysis in terms of what it means, generally speaking, and specific to the town where feasible. So these three pieces of legislation, first of all, Bill 134, Affordable Homes and Good Jobs Act, a lot of this is around the affordable housing definitions and some of the updates and revisions that are coming proposed for that. Bill 136, Greenbelt Statute Law Amendment Act, I'm sure everybody's been following that with a lot of detail, just looking at Greenbelt protections and how there's been a little bit of a reversal of course on Greenbelt lands. We'll talk about that. And then finally, Bill 139, Less Red Tape, More Common Sense Act, just some high-level changes with the Ontario Heritage Act and the Niagara Escarpment Commission or Niagara Escarpment Plan. So first, Bill 134. So looking at some revisions to the definition of affordable residential unit, and the main thing to focus on here is that the existing definition that's in the Development Charges Act, which goes into evaluating things like development charge and parkland dedication exemptions for affordable units, that really took a only market-based approach. But this definition now also incorporates an income-based approach too. Again, it's part of a series of information. We expect more to come out. We've been talking for a while about information bulletins that are going to be released from the province. Those still haven't been released. So it appears to be continuing to be a work in progress. But there is a shift now looking at an income-based approach as well, which in some circumstances, as you'll see, actually increases the threshold a little bit in terms of affordability, which might not necessarily be a bad thing. So from an analysis standpoint, really What's happened now is the incorporation of that income-based approach. What's the focus is when establishing average market rents, average market ownership, and what affordable housing means, taking into account the income level of the 60th percentile for a market area. So I'll give you some numbers on that, just so you're aware. For Niagara Region, the affordable purchase price for the 60th percentile is $361,100. This is from CMHC data from 2022 for Niagara Region. The household income for the 60th percentile is $105,000 for Niagara Region as a whole. They didn't break it down specific to the town of Lincoln. Niagara Region affordable rent price for the 60th percentile is $1,610. Now, they don't differentiate between unit type or anything like that. It's just, that's what the average rent price is, and the 60th percentile income for renter households is $64,500. So there's these thresholds that are now considered, and also the added threshold of the cost of accommodation of the dwelling unit being less than 30% of that. So again, that's what's identified in the affordable purchase price. That's essentially 30% for the rental. So those values are what's identified for Niagara Region, and that's now the incorporation, whereas before it was strictly on market value, and it was a percentage of that, 80% of average market value, which was going to be established through these information bulletins. So what's the result of that? First of all, just through some basic research, and we've even had some input provided by Watson in this regard, when you look at renter averages, this is going to encourage a little bit more rental stock, because the going market rent is typically lower than this affordable rent that's identified. Typically, in most market areas, I would suspect that would be the same for Lincoln. But conversely, if you look at the purchase price for a dwelling unit, not rent, but purchase price, it's considerably lower than what an average unit would go for. So really what that's going to result in is probably more encouragement of rental stock, which is a good thing because there's a shortage. The downfall of that, what we perceive, is that there could be a little bit of a widening in the missing middle too, because really the only thing that could be considered affordable for an ownership unit is a small condo, probably, under this definition. And I would also note that, all of these new thresholds are based on the lesser amount of market condition versus income-based. So those are some of the spin-offs that will come out of these definitions should they go forward. There's also a requirement to ensure that the units remain affordable over a 25-year period. That's on the table, that's been proposed. That's something staff would be supportive of, absolutely. That's something that's not reflected in all CMHC programming. Some of them only have a minimal amount of a 10-year affordability commitment. So a little bit of a change in that as well, but we see that generally positively. So that's Bill 134 in a nutshell. Bill 136 is pertaining to the Greenbelt. This is all about the reversal of the decision to open up Greenbelt lands for development. This not only returns them, not only keeps that other significant amount of land that was added to the Greenbelt, that was previously in the Paris Galt Moraine, but also now enshrines Greenbelt properties in legislation. So now it requires a legislation change it will require legislation change to update Greenbelt boundaries, making it a little more difficult to do so, which, and there's also a commitment, to review the plan every 10 years. That's going to be reinstated. It was mandated by the previous government. So what this really means, there weren't any lands identified within the town for removal from the Greenbelt plan. So the first part doesn't really impact us, but we have had asks throughout the years for certain pieces of land. I won't rehash all of them. Some of them are minor, just in terms of rounding out a property. Makes sense from an urban boundary perspective. Some are pieces of land that have never been nor never will be used for agricultural purposes. So kind of that ground truthing that we do here at the local level hasn't quite been incorporated at the provincial level in all circumstances. So, we just want to make sure that we reiterate that those asks are still in play, and I think they should still be considered, subject to, appropriate criteria, of course, moving forward. So the good and the bad. The good is protection of Greenbelt is good. The bad is it's a little bit of a blanket approach. If there's a certain tract of land that actually does make sense for a variety of reasons, it makes it a little bit harder to make a change in that regard. Bill 139, Less Red Tape, More Common Sense Act. So we hear a lot of times for development permit applications in the Niagara Escarpment Plan area, which aren't subject to land use controls of the town, but it's a pretty long backlog. There's a lot of them. There's not typically a lot of staff that can process them in a timely manner, so they can take a little bit of time to get through in terms of the development permit approvals process with the Niagara Escarpment Commission. I think what we're seeing here is there's certain circumstances that will be recognized, although we don't have the details yet, where there's opportunities that are apparent to mitigate certain circumstances that the minister can allow some broader exemptions for lower risk activities. Again, the threshold of which we're not clear on to date, but generally speaking, it seems to be a positive because it might provide more flexibility to maybe manage some of those development permit applications given the circumstance. There's also a better range of tools and powers to provide the NEC greater abilities to inspect and address non-compliant development activities. We do hear about certain things from time to time, land uses happening in the Niagara Escarpment Commission where they need to get involved in. This provides them, it sounds like anyways, but this is all very high level, enhanced ability to do so. We're not quite sure yet what that support looks like, but generally speaking, we would view it as positive. There's also some minor amendments to the Ontario Heritage Act. Really, this is for religious organizations and Indigenous communities where there's certain instances where they have items that they need to get through, and there's Ontario Heritage Act implications if they're associated with certain religious aspects or things of the like. There are expedited ways to do so being proposed. Again, a little bit hazy on the details in terms of what that's going to look like, but generally speaking, providing that flexibility seems to make sense. We don't see any particular implications here at the town. It just sounds like a little bit of an opportunity to streamline these specific instances. So again, I kind of said most of this, but we're generally supportive of these changes for Bill 139 without having the fulsome set of information right now in terms of what exactly it looks like, which is not the first time we've had to tell you that from a provincial legislation update standpoint. But they seem to be positive. You see here with those changes to the Ontario Heritage Act, it would result in municipalities having 30 days to issue a notice of consent in response for applications for alterations. So a little bit of a timeline associated with that for us, but I think something that's fairly easily managed by staff because I don't anticipate a very large volume of those types of things coming forward at all. As a matter of fact, I'd be surprised if we get more than a handful for the foreseeable future. So really, that's the extent of the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruder. Do members of committee have any questions? Councillor Michalak.
Thank you very much, Chair Patriva. Don't want to disappoint. Through you to Matt. So, like, when I read, I read your report, and I thought you did a great job translating it and breaking it down and trying to explain it, but it still seems a little bit complicated to me, anyway. So when I read this one point, bullet point you had, more exemptions are provided for ownership of residential units that are more aligned with household income than market value. What does that look like? Does that look like if my daughter, hypothetical daughter, my hypothetical son, or somebody I know makes no money, has no income, and I just buy it for them and put it in their name, they can be titled in their name, and they can, they can benefit from the affordable ownership aspect. Is that still something that should be of concern?
That's a good question, Councillor. I think, generally speaking, there probably would be a little bit of gray area when it comes to that, maybe somebody buying a unit for somebody else, but as long as the household income is at that percentile, there would be that affordability component. I mean, you wouldn't be owning it, or maybe you would, but in that case, maybe then it's interpreted differently. We don't have that level of detail yet in terms of how that's going to be dealt with, that specific instance, but yeah, it's a good question. I would assume that whoever's, in the household, and again, the 60th income percentage, that's what identifies what the price is, right? They're attributing that to what that income rate is, so it might not matter as much either who moves in there. It's more attributed to what is laid out for that 60th percentile in that market area, similar to those numbers I gave you, right? So, you could purchase it, but they're tying it into what the 60th income percentile is for that market area, not your income necessarily. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It's just parents could be gifting their kids money, or there could be other sorts of ways of acquiring money to those that don't show much on the books, let's say, or on their. That would be a concern of mine. And I bring this up because I'm not sure, like, when we're looking at DC rates and we're looking at affordable housing and we're looking at that sort of thing, my understanding is that if a development is deemed affordable, then what are the DC revenues from a development like that looking like?
Through you, Mr. Chair, well, that's just it. That's why these definitions are so important, because if they meet the definition, then they would be exempt from development charges. That's the implication.
And I think that's where we got to be real careful, because depending on what the DC charge is, a developer may say, well, if I tighten the price down 20 grand, I won't have to pay DC charges. So I'd rather give the discount, to the end user than pay the DC charges. Meanwhile, the municipality's out. That's what I'm reading, unless I'm incorrect.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I get your point in principle, Councillor, but I think it depends. That might be the case maybe with market or rental stock, but ownership stock, you saw what the purchase price would be based on the 2022 numbers is $361,000. I think most developers would tell you that's a lot more than a $20,000 decline when it comes to ownership housing, right? So I think that's what we're trying to say is in the comments, is that ownership housing, it's pretty tough. Like, a lot of times for most units, even townhouses, you're looking at double that. So for a developer to come down that much, it makes the threshold that harder to achieve. But for rental stock, not quite the same. So.
And that 361, that's a region. That's not the Lincoln. That's not Lincoln. And it was 3 years ago you could buy a brand new condo for $420. So that's where I think, I'm very cautious about the numbers, like as far as where they are now, where they could go, and what could potentially happen if we're not careful looking at all scenarios. That's just what I looked at. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. And unfortunately, when these developments happen, you're not looking at hundreds of units. You're looking at single digits or buildings. 17%, 18% of it. So I think the fear of losing out on a lot of the DCs, because when they look at the pro forma, they're better off to sell the unit. So we need to steer them in that direction. Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. So, Mr. Bruder, so just to continue along this thought process that Councillor Mikulak started. So if we don't have an affordable component, or if there is an affordable component, the developer would be DC exempt.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, that's correct, for the units that are deemed affordable.
Right.
Yeah.
So he comes to us, floats out a proposal, goes to CMHC, and has a funding model that's going to be affordable for 10 years. We're saying we want 20 to 25, but we need affordable property. We need rental property in Lincoln. So where's the balance? Because, we're saying we want a bigger threshold, we want a bigger runway than 10 years. So is there a concern that we're pushing the developer away if we're saying 25 years, or do you think there's an opportunity to find a happy medium there, or what's the thought process, as we go into some of these proposals that we're going to be speaking about in the very, very near future?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think, our desire for a little bit more runway, as you put it, actually aligns with these updates as part of Bill 134, because there's now in there, it looks like a proposal for the term to be extended out to 25 years. So it sounds like there is some alignment. If I'm reading that, I'm seeing that the province also wants to see more runway as well. So, it could very well be, if this moves forward to implementation, that's going to be required anyway when they look at affordable housing. And I think generally speaking, for us, it's important because, we've heard it time and time again, 10 years, that's not looking at the long-term impacts to housing stock. That's just, for the interim future, and then after that, it reverts to potentially to a stock that's not affordable. So notwithstanding that, I think it's inherent on us to work with developers that have an affordable housing model in mind and try to maximize term. And I think they understand why we're doing it. Does it make their pro forma a little bit more difficult? I've heard more, they're okay with an increase of the term potentially, but they want more flexibility. They want to be nimble to market conditions when they maybe do things like renegotiate mortgages and things like that. So I think provided that there's a way to do that, and I think there is, they're not necessarily opposed, at least the ones that I've talked to, about a little bit longer of a term.
Just a second question, Chair, through you to Mr. Bruder. So when you talked about those numbers that you threw out, 105,000 household income and 1610 per month for a rental, are those numbers just like based on 30% of household income just specifically for rental, or is that all in? Because, if we're looking at some of these buildings that are coming before us, they're talking about affordable, but on top of, whatever they're paying in terms of a rental per month, they're also going to be looking at a cost for underground parking. They're going to be looking at some utility charges, some bike share, some utilities. So is that on top of 1610, or is that all factored in?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a really, really good question. Our understanding is that that's built in. That's what they pay. It needs to be 30% of their average or of their income. And again, at the 60th percentile for renters, their income is $64,500. If you do the math, 30% equates to that 1610. So that's our understanding, is that's required for the dwelling unit. That's to rent the unit. Now, the only thing that and that would include, they'd price that based on their pro forma for things like underground parking. But one of the things I'm not sure how that ties in with is, if there's any other condo fees, I would assume they get looped into that price as well, but it might be something that requires a little bit more follow-up, and I might have to get back to you. But our understanding right now is that's all inclusive.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Bernay. Councilor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For you, a quick question. So thank you for the analysis on this, Director Bruder. Obviously, again, just looking at our financial situation again, we are in a bit of the pinch that we're in because the lack of DCs that are coming in because of the slowdown of development. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking of Cavalry. So part of that, there is a 5-story build being requested, which would require, I think, a rezoning, so a council approval. But the majority of those units, if not all of them, I think are rent geared to income, which would then probably qualify for the DC exemption. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, the way it's working out now, and again, this is still subject, we're going into the public meeting next week, but there's going to be further dialogue when it comes to the affordability piece. But the part that's actually determined affordable, and that's contingent on CMHC program assistance, there's only right now proposed to be 17% of the units within that apartment building currently. The rest are considered attainable, which, again, it does fill that affordability gap to an extent. It provides a range of housing price, but those wouldn't be eligible for development charge exemption. So it's not the whole apartment building.
Okay, that's good. So then hypothetical question through you, Mr. Chair. So let's say there was a developer came through and they needed a council approval for rezoning, and they were all going to fit under the DC exemption. What would be the reward for council or the town to approve that, knowing that we're not going to get any DCs out of that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, your reward would be the provision of the affordable housing, and also it would be probably, I'm assuming again, based on some of the talk around the definitions we're hearing today, an increase in rental stock, which we don't have much of. So those would be kind of the key benefits, and that's really the intention, is to try to stimulate development of that form of housing and at that type of purchase price. So, at the end of the day, that's what it would come down to for that scenario.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Berger.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And to Councillor Russell's point there, Matt, is that not to something in that the provincial government making us whole? So by doing this, there might be incentives flowing, especially on a building like that won't have a parkland dedication, won't have community benefits. So that's that whole making us whole discussion that they still haven't come to us with, correct?
I would say that's probably correct, Mr. Chair, but we're already hearing some, when I think about some of these things too, when you think about development charges, you think about infrastructure requirements and things like that, and I think we're starting to see and hear some rumblings coming from higher levels of government in terms of some funding opportunities for municipalities that are, experiencing these forms of development, or maybe in some cases encouraging these types of development where it makes sense. So I think that conversation is heating up, but you're right, we don't have the fulsome picture of what making us whole looks like by any means. So,
Okay. Thank you very much. I see no further discussion. I have a motion moved by Councillor Murray to receive and file report PD 39-23 regarding Bill 134, Affordable Homes and Good Jobs Act 2023, Bill 136, Greenbelt Statute Law Amendment Act 2023, and Bill 139, Less Red Tape, More Common Sense Act 2023. And direct staff to submit report PD 39-23 to the province to represent formal comments from the town with respect to Bill 134, Affordable Homes and Good Jobs Act 2023, Bill 136, Greenbelt Statute Law Amendment Act 2023, and Bill 139, Less Red Tape, More Common Sense Act 2023. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. I will now open the vote. Councillor Rajima? Thank you. And I'll close the vote, and that motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to go back to the Heritage Advisory Committee minutes, September 14, 2023. Councillor Renshima, you had a question with respect to this. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, my question is about, in the minutes, there's reference to a particular tree that may need protection. And so my question, I don't know if anybody can answer it here today, but is that time sensitive?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, do you mean the tree on Mountain Street? There were two trees referenced
Yes.
in these minutes, the one on Mountain Street.
Yeah.
It's, the property, I believe, is going up for sale. I'm not sure if it has been sold yet. But there is, it could be at risk, because that property could be developed. Although the tree is along the road allowance, so it could be saved, but it is at risk. And we have a Heritage Committee member that has done some research on the tree. The research wasn't finalized for our November meeting as mentioned in these minutes, but we will bring forward a recommendation on that tree in Q1 of 2024 to the Heritage Committee.
Okay, I guess that was my next question, is when will we be hearing about that? Because first of all, is it at risk? And second of all, if so, when will we be making a decision on that?
So, and through you, Chair, the Heritage Committee will be providing a recommendation in early 2024.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Counselor. And you know what, and you touched on that because I had a question. So it says, and if I may, it says the manager of planning and development provided ownership information of the tree. But that information isn't contained in the minutes. So if we're not at that meeting, we don't know what was said. So should there not be some more detail in these minutes? So when committee or council is reviewing those, we know what's going on? So just, that was my question, and, because it came up a couple times in that, so, yeah.
And through you, Chair, we can definitely provide some more detail in the minutes. The question was whether the tree was within the road allowance or on the private property, and it was on the private property.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, because knowing what's coming forward and that being in Councillor Brunet and my wards, you know, a little bit more info would help in the long run. So thank you. So I'm going to go back to page 3. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, 3. Okay. So I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers to receive and file the consent agenda for Monday, November 27, 2023. Heritage Advisory Committee minutes of September 14th, 2023. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair, and I've just amended the wording to read that we approve the minutes because it was pulled from the consent agenda.
Okay,
And with that, I will open the vote.
excellent.
Thank you. And I'll close the vote, and that motion carries. Thank you.
That is fantastic. So we've now concluded the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to transition to our next committee agenda.
Thank you, Chair Patriva. As there are no items for the Community Services and Infrastructure Committee agenda, I will be moving the gavel to Councillor and Chair Lynn Timmers to assume the chair at this time for General Business and Finance Committee agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Clerk. As Chair, we will begin the General Business and Finance Committee agenda.
3 times. Yeah.
That's right. I want to get your attention over there. One knock for each of you.
That would be 4. That's 3 for
Hey.
Councillor McLeod.
Councillor Reimer's nice and quiet over there. So we have no delegations and we have no reports this evening. And we will now consider agenda item 10.1, motion to consider confidential items. Before I read the motion and we move into closed, I would like to explain what will happen for those watching this meeting online. First, there will be a closed session statement that the Deputy Clerk will go through for staff that will be attending the closed session remotely. Once that is completed, we will move on with the motion to move into closed. The Deputy Clerk will be turning off the live webcast during the closed portion of the meeting. Once we have completed the closed portion of the meeting, we will resume with the live webcast and carry on with the public portion of the meeting, and we will read the motions in public session. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to conduct the closed session statement for those attending the closed session remotely.
Thank you, Chair Timmers. All members are reminded that any discussions in closed session are to remain confidential as per our procedural bylaw and our code of conduct for the Council of the Town of Lincoln. Before we begin, I need each member that is attending electronically to confirm the following: that you understand that matters are to remain confidential, and confirm no one is present with you, and confirm no one else can hear this closed session, and confirm that you are not using any electronic devices other than your tablet, computer, telephone for the video conferencing, and confirm that you are not recording this portion of the meeting. If you acknowledge all of the above, please reply with "I understand" and confirm to all of the statements as I read your name aloud. Councillor Russell?
I understand and confirm to all the statements.
Thank you. Director of Economic Development and Communications?
I agree and confirm to all the statements.
Thank you. Director of Community Services?
I understand and confirm to all the statements.
Thank you. Treasurer?
Yes, sorry, I heard that and I understand the statements.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Timmers.
Great, thank you very much. I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva. Under Section 239 of the Municipal Act, notice is hereby given that council adjourn to closed session in order to address item 10.1 as follows. Pursuant to Section 239, subsection 2D, labor relations or employee negotiations as it pertains to collective bargaining agreement update. I will now ask our deputy clerk to open the vote.
Thank you, Chair. That vote's now open. Councillor Russell, may I have your vote, please? Oh, thank you. Councillor Bernay? That's okay, I can, thank you. And that motion carries. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Our deputy clerk will now proceed with the technical requirements to move into closed session. Devan, to confirm when we're ready to proceed, please.